To help all Americans enrich their lives by better knowing and enjoying our wildlife heritage, your National Audubon Society is committed to providing educational information of the highest quality. The publications of the National Audubon Society include award-winning Audubon magazine and American Birds, the field journal for committed bird enthusiasts. With the Video Guide to the Birds of North America, the Audubon Society offers a home video reference for family use in preparing for observing birds in nature. Welcome to Volume 3 of the Audubon Society's Video Guide to the Birds of North America. In this volume, we meet birds across the continent. From a remote island off the coast of Maine, where Audubon researchers are helping the Atlantic puffin return to a former stronghold, to Arizona, where the roadrunner rules the desert fast lanes. For each species, the video guide provides the information you need to identify the bird in the field and, where time permits, a comment on the bird's ecology and population status. There's motion footage to show behavior, still photographs to give details of markings, and computer-generated range maps to reveal the ranges where they summer, graded by density, where they winter, and where they are present in all seasons. Voice or other sound is included if that is helpful in identifying the birds. There's a notation on each bird's length and, where useful, on wingspan. The correct common name and the Latin name of each bird appear in the colored name band at the bottom of the screen. This volume describes the alcids, the pigeons, doves, and cuckoos, the owls, the nightjars, the swifts and hummingbirds, the kingfishers and trogons, and the woodpeckers. The colored name bands indicate the major group to which each bird belongs and can be used to expedite locating a species in the cassette when your VCR is in the search mode. This list of the species covered in Volume 3 shows the reference number for each species. If you'd like to prepare an index, rewind the cassette to the opening and zero the counter on your VCR. Then play through the cassette, noting the counter values at the beginning of each description. Thereafter, if you zero the counter at the same location each time the cassette is loaded into your VCR, you can fast forward to the desired counter number. The diverse members of the family Alcidae, often simply called alcids, are seabirds that are most common in the far north. All find their food by swimming underwater, using their wings to fly through the depths. When flying through the air, they are somewhat less graceful, beating their short wings very rapidly and often seeming to crash land. Most alcids are patterned in black and white, and most wear distinct plumages for summer and winter. Standing upright on the rocks in its black and white summer plumage, the razorbill might suggest a penguin. Razorbills may fly many miles from their nesting colonies on northern islands and cliffs, returning with fish they have caught as much as 300 feet below the surface. Recognized all year by its thick, patterned bill, the razorbill has a black throat in summer, white in winter. Razorbills are found only in the North Atlantic. Their winter flocks are usually well offshore, but they may be seen from the coast at times, especially after storms. Another large alcid, the common murre, has a long pointed bill, and its upper parts are sooty gray, not black. It is found on both coasts, but is most widespread in the west, where it nests commonly south to California. Colonies of murres nest on exposed ledges of sheer rocky cliffs. Their eggs, laid on bare rock, are nearly pointed at one end to keep them from rolling. In breeding plumage, the head and neck are entirely dark. In winter, the face is mostly white with a long, dark stripe behind the eye. Unlike some of the ocean-going alcids, the black guillemot is usually found along the immediate coastline, close to rocky shores. It apparently does most of its fishing not far below the surface. Black guillemots in summer show large white wing patches and bright orange feet. They appear far less distinctive in winter when they are mottled with gray on the back and head and otherwise mostly white, so that the white wing patch shows less contrast. Locally common in coastal New England, the black guillemot also extends across the Arctic to Alaska. Replacing the black guillemot on the Pacific coast is the pigeon guillemot. The two species are very similar, but the pigeon guillemot usually has a dark wedge running part way across the white wing patch. In winter, it may not look quite as pale as the black guillemot at that season. Seen in flight, the underside of the wings are bright white on the black guillemot, grayish on the pigeon guillemot. Of course, range is usually the best way to tell them apart, since the two species overlap only in parts of western Alaska. The marbled merlet departs from the usual Alcid color scheme of crisp contrasts. Its breeding plumage is a mottled dusky brown. This color provides camouflage in summer when the merlet nests high in coniferous trees near the coast. When it is not hidden on the nest, the merlet is always on the ocean, sometimes in a protected cove. In winter, the marbled merlet reverts to a black and white pattern. It can be known by its small size and the white stripe on the back above each wing. The clown-faced Atlantic puffin is best known for its big, triangular, multicolored bill. The puffin sheds the outer layer of the bill in fall, so during the winter the bill looks less colorful and a bit smaller. Useful as well as decorative, this bill can carry as many as half a dozen small fish when the bird is feeding young. Unlike larger alcids such as murres, puffins nest in underground burrows or in crevices among the rocks. Breeding on islands off eastern Canada, the Atlantic puffin has declined at the southern end of its range. However, the National Audubon Society and other organizations are working to reintroduce the puffin to its former haunts in Maine. Very similar to the Atlantic puffin, but never found in the same places, the horned puffin is an Alaskan specialty. Even in winter, it rarely comes much farther south. Named for the small, fleshy horn above each eye, it is more easily recognized by its big, bicolored bill and its white face and underparts. In winter, the bill is duller and the face is grayer. The black underparts, mostly red bill, and long blonde plumes on the face in summer distinguish the tufted puffin. In winter it loses the facial markings and looks dark all over, but its bill is still mostly red. Young birds are plain, dark gray, and have smaller, dull yellow bills. Although found the length of the Pacific coast, the tufted puffin is most common in southern Alaska. Although they vary in size and color, pigeons and doves are all similar in having short, straight bills and relatively small, rounded heads. On the ground, they bob their heads back and forth stiffly as they walk with short, quick steps. In the air, their flight is swift and direct, and flocks may be seen flying to favored watering sites. Pigeons and doves feed mainly on seeds and small berries. The familiar park pigeon, common in cities throughout North America, is descended from the wild rock dove of Europe. Today's pigeons are quite variable in color, from white to rufous to black. But the original pattern was a gray bird with a white rump patch, dark tail band, and slight purple and green iridescence on the neck. Feral rock doves now nest around buildings, bridges, and other structures. The big, band-tailed pigeon is common through much of the West. Even larger than the rock dove, it may be recognized by its black-tipped yellow bill, pinkish tones on the head and chest, and broad pale band at the tip of the tail. Adults also have a narrow white half collar around the back of the neck. In the southwest and along the northern Pacific coast, it is primarily a summer resident, and it can be seen all year in California. Flocks may wander from the mountains to the valleys as different food sources come into season. Found locally in southern Florida, mostly in the Everglades and the Keys, the white-crowned pigeon is dark, slaty gray except for its trademark, the white cap. White crowns are common throughout much of the Caribbean, and flocks are often seen flying from one island to another in search of the tropical fruits on which they feed. Named for its mournful song, the mourning dove is among the most widespread and familiar of North American birds, living in open countryside and often in towns. It is pale buffy brown with a black spot on the face and others on the wings. There's a faint wash of pink on the underparts and gray on the back, but the best field mark is the long pointed tail. When it flies, the wings make a whistling sound, and white flashes in the sides of the tail. In winter, mourning doves may gather in large flocks to roost. Toward the northern edge of their wintering range, they tend to be uncommon and local. In summer, the canyons and riverside groves of the southwest echo with the crowing of the white-winged dove. Shorter-tailed and heavier-bodied than the mourning dove, the white wing is most easily recognized by its bold white wing patches, most conspicuous in flight. Although they are abundant in the southwest during the summer and spring, most white wings depart abruptly in early fall. The few that remain through the winter are mostly found in towns. Recently, the white wing has also become a common resident locally in southern Florida. An Asian bird brought to Los Angeles around the turn of the century, the spotted dove is now locally common in Southern California. It is most common in suburban areas around shade trees, lawns, and citrus groves. The spotted dove has a slightly shorter tail and a deeper, ruddy pink wash on the chest than the mourning dove. There is a spotted half collar around the back of the neck, hard to see on young birds. Short-tailed and small, hardly larger than a sparrow, the common ground dove is found locally across the South. It feeds mainly on seeds and will come to bird feeders placed near cover. Seen at rest or walking, it looks rather plain, with dark scaling on the chest and black spots on the wings. In flight, it shows a rufous patch in the wing. Although it can be found all year throughout its range, the ground dove seems to be more numerous in summer than in winter in the southwest. In the warmer parts of Texas and the southwest, one of the most familiar birds of parks and yards is the little Inca dove. The dark, scaly effect on its plumage is more pronounced than that of the common ground dove, and it has a longer tail. When it takes flight, the Inca dove flashes conspicuous white in the tail, as well as a rufous patch in each wing. The wings make a rattling sound on takeoff. Its mournful two-noted song, suggesting the words "no hope" to some listeners, is heard incessantly in spring. In the more arid parts of the southwest, the Inca dove is almost always found around cities, towns, and ranch houses, not in the open desert. Found worldwide, the members of the cuckoo family are mostly medium-sized, long-tailed, insect-eating birds. Some cuckoos are famous for laying their eggs in the nests of other birds, but the North American members raise their own young. Our species may be divided into three very different groups: the typical cuckoos, the roadrunner, and the anis. A shy bird of the forest, the yellow-billed cuckoo would often go undetected but for its loud, clattering calls. Seen in flight across a clearing, it looks slim and long-tailed, with a rufous flash in the wings and bold black and white spotting in the tail. Cuckoos are among the few birds that readily eat furry caterpillars. Yellow-bills may become locally abundant where there is an outbreak of gypsy moth caterpillars or other species. In recent years, the yellow-billed cuckoo has become quite rare at the western edge of its range. A plainer bird is the black-billed cuckoo, which lacks the rufous in the wings and has smaller white tail spots than the yellow-billed cuckoo. Shy and elusive, the black-billed rarely permits the close view needed to see the narrow red ring around the eye. Its summer range extends farther north than that of the yellow-billed, but it is absent from the southwest. The most famous bird of the southwestern deserts is the greater roadrunner. The reputation of this ground-dwelling cuckoo is sometimes exaggerated, but it is true that the bird can run 15 miles per hour, and it does eat snakes, rattlesnakes included. It also eats many insects, lizards, and occasionally small birds, catching its prey with short, quick dashes. Most common in deserts, the roadrunner can be found in small numbers as far east as central Arkansas. Little groups of smooth-billed anis may be found locally in southern Florida, around the edges of marshes and brushy areas. They might be mistaken for other long-tailed blackbirds, such as grackles, except that anis have curiously arched bills like puffins, and their feathers have a permanently disheveled look. In flight, anis proceed with several quick flaps followed by an unsteady glide. On the ground, they shuffle or hop about rather clumsily. Replacing the smooth-billed ani in Texas is the groove-billed ani. The two anis have similar habits, and they also look very similar in the field. The grooves on the bill are difficult to see except at very close range, but the groove-billed has a smaller, less arched bill than the smooth-billed ani. In its more westerly distribution, the groove-billed ani is often found in drier country than the smooth-billed, sometimes feeding on insects flushed by grazing cattle. Their reputation for wisdom may be unfounded, but the owls are still impressive for their many adaptations to hunting at night. Their exceptional eyesight allows them to see very well in dim light, and they have such precise hearing that they can locate prey by sound alone if necessary. The softened edges of their feathers make the flight of owls virtually silent. Most owls are nocturnal, but a few are active by day. Large and powerful, the great horned owl is able to capture snakes, rats, rabbits, birds, and even skunks. It is also very adaptable, living in habitats as diverse as northern forests, southern swampland, and southwestern desert. The deep hooting of this owl may be heard at night throughout the year. In some northern areas, great horned owls start their nesting cycle in midwinter. Apparently, this early start is necessary so that the young birds will have a long season to learn to fend for themselves before the next winter arrives. The only common small owl in most of the East is the little eastern screech owl, no bigger than a robin. Despite its name, the typical calls are a descending whinny and a low-pitched trill. Too small for the hefty prey favored by great horned owls, it feeds mostly on large insects and small rodents. Eastern screech owls come in several color morphs. Gray is the more frequent, but they may be dark brown or reddish brown. The reddish birds tend to be most numerous in the southeastern part of the range. Widespread in the lowlands west of the Great Plains is the western screech owl. It is almost identical to its eastern relative, but has a different voice. Instead of the descending wail of the eastern screech owl, it has an accelerating series of notes on one pitch. The western screech owl is almost always gray, with reddish or brownish individuals found locally in the northwest. Its bill is blackish at the base, while that of the eastern screech owl is yellowish-green. The flammulated owl is our only small owl with dark brown eyes. With its soft voice and small size, it is easily overlooked, even though it is common during summer in ponderosa pine forests of the western mountains. Because it feeds on moths and other nocturnal insects, it cannot find food in these mountains during the winter, so the flammulated owl migrates to Mexico in autumn. At first glance, it might be mistaken for a great horned owl, but the long-eared owl is a smaller, slimmer bird with strong vertical striping on the lower underparts instead of the narrow horizontal barring of the great horned. It also has notably long ear tufts and usually a black crescent around the eye. Although it is widespread, the long-eared owl is uncommon in most parts of its range. It usually spends the day roosting in dense cover, often conifers, and hunts over open country at night. During the winter, several long-eareds may roost close together. A buffy brown owl of marshes and fields, the short-eared owl is often active by day, especially in cold or cloudy weather. In flight, it looks pale and large-headed, with a black patch at the bend of the wing and a large buffy patch in the outer flight feathers. Its wing beats are floppy and irregular. When perched, the short ear tufts are barely noticeable. It looks round-headed, with a black smudge around each eye and strong striping on the upper breast. Found on most of the continents, the short-eared owl is widespread in North America as well, but has become rare in many southern areas of its range here. At night, or even on cloudy days, the rich hooting of the barred owl is a familiar sound in southern swamps. This big, round-headed owl may be recognized by its bold pattern of barring and striping on the underparts, and by its dark brown eyes. Although it is most common in the southeast, it is also found across the forests of Canada and has recently spread into the Pacific Northwest. A wilderness bird of the West, the spotted owl is uncommon throughout its range. It is similar to the barred owl, but has a more variegated pattern of spots and short bars. Near the Mexican border, the spotted owl is found mainly in rugged canyons. In the Pacific Northwest, it seems to be limited to extensive, uncut forests. The National Audubon Society and other organizations have been working to protect some of these old-growth forests in order to preserve a home for the spotted owl and other forms of wildlife. Our biggest owl in total length, the great gray owl, appears so large partly because of its fluffy plumage. In actual body size, it is smaller than the great horned owl, taking smaller prey such as rodents. Mostly a bird of the far north, the great gray owl is a scarce nesting bird south of the Canadian border. Some years it will stage a winter invasion, with small numbers crossing into the northern tier of states. These visitors, recognized by their great size and dark ringed faces, are often rather tame and allow close approach. Increasing development has encroached upon the habitat of the burrowing owl. This long-legged little owl is more vulnerable than most because it must nest in burrows in the ground in open country. It can dig its own holes, but usually the burrowing owl chooses to modify a burrow provided by a prairie dog, ground squirrel, or gopher tortoise. It has a curiously disjunct range. It is common over much of the West and has an isolated population in Florida. Although the burrowing owl often stands guard on a fence post or beside its den by day, it does most of its hunting at night. Small size, striped underparts, and relatively long tail mark the northern pygmy owl, an uncommon bird of the western mountains. It may call by day or by night, but it actually does most of its hunting by day because it feeds primarily on small birds. If songbirds discover a pygmy owl or any other type of owl perched in the open, they may gather to harass and scold with alarm notes. mostly from a safe distance. Pygmy owls nest in cavities or old woodpecker holes in trees, like several other small owls. One of the smallest owls in the world, the sparrow-sized elf owl, lives almost entirely on insects. For this reason, it is strictly a summer resident north of Mexico, leaving when insects retire for the winter. In the American Southwest, the elf owl is found in deserts and canyons, often nesting in cavities in giant cactus. Distinguished by its tiny size, lack of ear tufts, and blurry pattern on the underparts, it can be found at dusk by its yelping and chuckling call notes. For American pioneers, the raspy, rhythmic call of the northern saw-whet owl brought to mind the strokes of a whetstone sharpening a saw. In winter, it is usually silent, roosting by day in conifers, and often tame enough to allow close approach. It can be recognized by its small size, lack of ear tufts, and reddish-brown stripes on the underparts. Juveniles, seen on the breeding range in summer, are all rich brown and buff with white facial markings. Despite its wide distribution, the saw-whet owl is not often seen. A bird of the subarctic wilderness, the northern hawk owl is a sparse resident of the vast spruce lands across Canada and Alaska. Often active by day, it may be seen perched at the tip of a spruce, where its long-tailed silhouette makes it look more like a falcon than a typical owl. Other field marks include the heavily barred underparts and the black facial border. Hawk owls are essentially non-migratory, but occasionally one will winter south of the Canadian border, attracting hordes of unruly birdwatchers. When winter comes to the northern edge of the United States, it may bring snowy owls down from the high Arctic. These big white owls are conspicuous, perching on the ground or on posts in open country. On their Arctic breeding grounds, snowy owls feed on lemmings. When lemming populations crash, the snowies may wander far south the next winter, beyond the range on the map. Young snowy owls, especially females, are heavily spotted with black. Old males may be completely white. In a separate family from other owls, the barn owl is often found roosting by day in old buildings, caves, or abandoned mine shafts. At night, it floats like a ghost over the surrounding open country. It is so pale that it is sometimes mistaken for the much larger snowy owl. However, the barn owl has dark eyes in an odd monkey-like face, and its back is golden brown. Its calls are eerie, from hisses to rasping screams, but the barn owl's taste for rats and mice assures welcome. Common in parts of the south and west, it is generally rare toward the northern end of its range. Most members of the nightjar family are birds of mystery, heard by night but hidden during daylight. Most likely to be seen are the so-called nighthawks, often abroad by day. All nightjars are cryptic brownish birds with short, broad bills for catching insects in flight. Seen on roads at night, their eyes reflect headlights with a reddish eye shine. Despite its name, the common nighthawk is not a hawk, nor is it active only at night. Foraging high above the ground, often by day, it may be known by its erratic flight and by its angular pointed wings with white patches near the tip. The common nighthawk punctuates its nasal call notes with a remarkable display, featuring a steep dive and creating a loud rushing or booming sound with its wings. It lays its eggs on bare ground, but it also has learned to nest on the gravel roofs of buildings, so the nighthawk has become a city bird in some areas. Found almost throughout the continent in summer, the common nighthawk winters in South America. Replacing the common nighthawk locally in southwestern deserts is the lesser nighthawk. The two nighthawks are very similar, but the lesser is smaller and buffier, and the pale bar on the wing is closer to the tip. On the female, this bar is buff, not white. The lesser nighthawk has no booming display and no loud call note. Usually silent, it sometimes gives a low-pitched trilling or whinnying sound. Named for its call, the whippoorwill is heard far more often than seen. It lends a familiar voice to the nighttime woods over much of the east and in the mountains of the southwest as well. By day, the whippoorwill rests quietly on the ground or on a tree branch where its muted brown pattern blends perfectly with the background. If approached too closely by day, the whippoorwill may fly away through the woods, flashing large white patches in the corners of its tail if it is a male. In forests of oak or pine in the deep south, the chuck-will's widow leads the nocturnal chorus. It is larger and longer-tailed than the whippoorwill and is shaded in warmer browns. The corners of the tail are mixed buff and white on males, in place of the pure white patches shown by the male whippoorwill. In recent years, the chuck-will's widow has spread northward in some parts of the east. In arid parts of the west, the common poorwill falls at night from dry canyons and rocky hills. Patterned in browns and grays like other nightjars, it has a shorter tail than most of its relatives, with small white patches in the tail corners. Its winter range is not well known. Some poorwills have actually been proven to hibernate, and they may emerge to call on warm winter nights. Widespread in the American tropics, the common parake is found year-round in brushy woods and mesquite thickets of southern Texas. In flight, the parake might be mistaken for a nighthawk because it also has a white bar across each wingtip. However, the parake has more rounded wings and a long, rounded tail. It hunts only at night, while nighthawks are often abroad by day. Swifts are superb flyers, fast and powerful, that speed through the air in pursuit of flying insects. Almost all of their waking hours are spent in flight. One European species of swift is even thought to sleep on the wing. Their tiny feet are unsuited to perching, so they normally rest by clinging to vertical surfaces. Swifts have very short tails and long, narrow wings. Originally, the chimney swift nested in hollow trees, but having learned to nest in chimneys, it found ready-made nesting sites and adapted quickly to their urban lifestyle. Cigar-shaped and sooty gray, the chimney swift flies with very rapid, stiff wing beats, giving loud, chippering call notes. The chimney swift is common in summer throughout the east, and occasionally summers as far west as California. The winter range is poorly known, but seems to be centered on the Amazon basin in South America. Very similar to the chimney swift and replacing it in the far west, Vaux's swift is slightly smaller and shorter-winged and slightly paler on the throat. It has a softer voice as well, with a wheezing quality. Vaux's swifts do not usually nest in chimneys, so they have not benefited from man's presence as the chimney swifts have. Present all year in parts of the American tropics, Vaux's swift enters western North America only in summer. The white-throated is our largest and most smartly patterned swift. It is found throughout most of the West and is especially numerous in canyon country. It might be mistaken for the violet-green swallow, another aerial feeder, but the swallow has shorter wings, slower flight, and pure white underparts. White-throated swifts usually nest in crevices in vertical rock, especially in high cliffs, but they may forage many miles away from these sites. Unlike the other swifts, the white-throated swift remains throughout the winter in the warmer parts of the Southwest. The smallest birds in the world, and perhaps the most remarkable, the hummingbirds are tiny nectar feeders with boundless energy. They can hover motionless or fly up, down, or backwards with ease. Adapted for feeding at flowers, these birds will also come to special feeders filled with sugar and clear water. Most hummingbirds have iridescent colors, and the males of many species have a brilliantly colored gorget, or throat patch. Hummingbirds are primarily tropical. In North America, most species are found in the southwest, near the Mexican border. Any hummingbird seen in eastern North America is almost certain to be the ruby-throated. The adult male earns the name of the species. His gorget is black until the sun catches the ruby-red iridescence. Females and immatures lack the gorget and have white spots in the tail. Although they are found throughout the east in summer, ruby-throated hummingbirds leave North America almost entirely in winter, migrating to Mexico or beyond. A western species, the male black-chinned hummingbird is quite similar to the male ruby-throated, except that his gorget features an iridescent purple band below a black area on the chin. Females and immatures are nearly identical to the female ruby-throated. However, these two species rarely overlap in range. Compared to other female hummingbirds in the West, the black-chinned may be known by her small and plain look, notably long bill, frequent tail wagging while hovering, and soft call note. In many lowland areas of the West, the black-chinned is the most common hummingbird in summer, but it disappears in winter. On the Pacific coast, the brilliant rose-red crown and throat of the male Anna's hummingbird make it unique. The female is less distinctive. She is similar to the female black-chinned, but has a different call note, a metallic chipping sound, and usually hovers without much tail movement. Anna's is one of the few North American hummingbirds with well-developed song, a wheezy series accented by a loud double note, and males will sing repeatedly from an exposed perch. This bird seems better adapted to cold weather than most hummingbirds and is found all year throughout most of its range. In the mountain meadows of the Rockies, the male broad-tailed is betrayed by the loud metallic trilling of his wings. He looks deep green on the upper parts and pale green on the sides, with a rose-red throat. The female lacks the red gorget and has a buffy wash on the sides and rufous at the base of the tail. The broad-tailed is the most common nesting hummingbird in many mountain areas of the Great Basin and the Rockies, but it does not normally reach the Pacific seaboard. The male rufous hummingbird shines bright copper on the back like a new penny and has a flaming orange-red gorget. Females and young birds are golden green above and speckled on the throat with touches of reddish-brown in the plumage. Although it is one of the smaller hummingbirds, the rufous can be quite aggressive, chasing larger species away from its favored flower patch or feeder. In early spring, when the mountains are still covered with snow, rufous hummingbirds migrate north along the Pacific coast. In late summer, their southward migration takes them through the mountains. Very small numbers of this and other western hummingbirds may winter along the Gulf Coast. Very similar to the rufous hummingbird, the male Allen's differs in having the center of the back bright green instead of rufous. Females and the young of the two species are identical in the field. Allen's hummingbird is a very early migrant, moving north along the coast in February and heading south in July. However, one population on California's Channel Islands and locally around Los Angeles is present all year. North America's smallest bird is the calliope hummingbird, known by its very short tail, which it often holds up while hovering, and its very short bill. The female has a pale buffy wash on the underparts and fine speckles on the throat. The male's throat has flaring stripes of red and white. Nesting mainly in the mountains of the northwestern interior, the calliope hummingbird is an uncommon migrant, through the other mountain areas of the West and is usually outnumbered by the rufous hummingbird. Other hummingbirds migrate through the desert, but Costa's hummingbird favors the desert all year. A relatively small and short-tailed hummingbird, the male Costa's is marked with a bright purple crown and a bright purple gorget that flares back to a point on each side of the neck. It has a distinctive song consisting of a very thin, high-pitched whistle. The female is plain and pale, without rufous tones. It differs from the female Anna's by its habit of flipping its tail constantly while hovering, and differs from the female black-chinned by its light, ticking call note. Restricted to the southwest, Costa's hummingbird is found all year in warmer desert regions and on the southern California coast. One of our largest hummingbirds, the blue-throated, is found only near the Mexican border. The blue on its throat is limited and difficult to see. The bird is more easily recognized by the white stripes on its face and by the big white patches in the corners of its broad, blue-black tail. Even in its limited U.S. range, the blue-throated hummingbird is very local, favoring shaded mountain canyons with running water. Another large southwestern hummingbird, the magnificent, is more widespread, occurring in dry pine oak woods as well as shady canyons. The male is very dark, with iridescence of purple on the crown and green on the throat. The female is grayish on the underparts, like the female blue-throated, but has a less contrasting tail pattern, dull gray-green with small white corners, not blue-black with large white corners. Although common only in southern Arizona, magnificent hummingbirds may show up in summer as far north as Colorado. Trogons are sluggish, colorful birds found in the tropics around the world. The elegant trogon reaches us only in southern Arizona, where it is locally common in summer in a few mountain canyons. The male elegant trogon is green above and red below, with a white bar across the chest and white patterning on the underside of the tail. The female has brown in place of green and has a white teardrop spot on the face. They nest in cavities in trees, usually choosing sycamores in Arizona. Kingfishers are small-footed, large-billed birds named for their ability to dive from the air and take fish just below the water's surface. Their nests are placed in tunnels which they excavate in vertical dirt banks. Our only widespread member of the family, the belted kingfisher, is a common sight along rivers and lakes where it watches from a high perch or above the water before diving for its prey. With its shaggy crest, oversized bill, and clattering call, it is easily recognized. Reversing the usual trend in birds, the female belted kingfisher is more colorful than the male. She has a bright, rusty band across the underparts, which the male lacks. It is widespread in summer, except for parts of the southwest. Along streams in southern Texas, the green kingfisher perches low, watching for minnows and aquatic insects. Smaller than the belted kingfisher, and with a less conspicuous crest, the green kingfisher is dark, glossy green above and has a chest band that is rufous in males, green in females. The white outer tail feathers show in flight. The green kingfisher is sometimes overlooked because it tends to stay low in vegetation near the water. Designed perfectly for a life of pounding on trees, woodpeckers have strong toes for grasping the bark, stiff tail feathers with which to prop themselves up, and chisel-like bills. Most woodpeckers feed on insects that live just below the bark, and by keeping these insects in check, they help to protect the trees. To advertise their territories in spring, male woodpeckers often drum loudly with their bills on dead limbs. For nesting, they excavate holes in dead tree trunks or limbs, and these cavities later serve as natural birdhouses for other birds. Almost all of our woodpeckers show some red on the head, but this is the only one in the east with an entirely red head. Males and females are patterned exactly alike, with a bright red hood and large white patches in the black wings. Young birds are brown on the head, back, and wings, but may be recognized by their white underparts and white wing patches. Colonies of red-headed woodpeckers are found nesting in open, park-like woodlands. Their nesting sites are sometimes taken over by the introduced European starling, so red-headeds have become scarce over much of their range. In winter, flocks of red-headeds can be found in groves of oak. Don't look for the red belly as a major field mark for the red-bellied woodpecker. It is much easier to see this bird's zebra-barred back, pale tan face and underparts, and bright red stripe up the nape. In males, the red stripe extends forward well over the crown. The red-bellied is common in woodlands in the southeastern states and seems to be gradually extending its range northward. Like some other woodpeckers, the red-bellied will often come to backyard bird feeders for suet, cracked corn, or large seeds. Replacing the red-bellied in central and southern Texas is the golden-fronted woodpecker. It usually inhabits somewhat drier and more open woodlands. Very similar to the red-bellied woodpecker, the golden-fronted has golden-yellow patches on the forehead and nape. The male shows a spot of red on the crown. In desert regions of the southwest, the Gila woodpecker may nest in the giant saguaro cactus or in tall trees along rivers. It is a plainer bird than the red-bellied woodpecker. The male has a small red cap, but the female's head is entirely pale brown. Our most widespread woodpecker, the northern flicker, is also the most variable, found in 3 distinct forms that were once considered separate species. All can be recognized as flickers by the overall brown look, spotted underparts, white rump, and flash of color under the wings and tail in flight. The yellow-shafted form is the eastern type, extending westward to Alaska across the Arctic slope in summer. In this form, the wing linings are tinged with bright yellow, and the back of the head is marked with a red crescent. Males have a black whisker mark. The red-shafted form is the flicker of the west, spreading into the southwestern lowlands and eastward on the Great Plains in winter. It has reddish wing linings, and the male has a red whisker mark, but there is no red on the nape. Yellow-shafted and red-shafted flickers often interbreed on the western plains, producing young that look intermediate between those forms. Found locally in the Arizona desert is a bird that looks like an intermediate, the so-called gilded form. It has yellow wing linings, like the yellow-shafted flicker, but it lacks the red crescent on the nape, and males have red whisker marks. Flickers are seen on the ground more often than most woodpeckers. They are among the few birds that relish ants. Bizarre feeding behavior sets the yellow-bellied sapsucker apart from most woodpeckers. The bird will drill neat rows of holes through the bark of a tree, then return periodically to drink the sap that has accumulated and to eat the insects attracted to the sap. The male yellow-bellied sapsucker has a red throat surrounded by black. The female's throat patch is white. Young birds are mostly brown-headed, but have the same long white wing stripe as the adults. The yellow-bellied sapsucker is more migratory than most of our woodpeckers. 2 close relatives of the yellow-bellied sapsucker, replacing it in the west, are the red-naped and red-breasted sapsuckers. The red-naped is almost identical to the yellow-bellied, but has a red strip on the upper nape and a broader red area on the throat. On females, the throat is half white and half red instead of all white. The red-naped sapsucker is found in the Rocky Mountains, the Great Basin, and the Southwest. Along the Pacific seaboard, This complex is represented by the red-breasted sapsucker. The head is entirely red. It might suggest the red-headed woodpecker of the east, but the underparts are deep yellow, not white. Similar to the other sapsuckers in habits, but very different in appearance, Williamson's sapsucker is restricted to the mountain west. Males are mostly black, with touches of white, yellow, and red. Females are strikingly different. With their brown heads and barred backs, they hardly suggest the other sapsuckers, but they usually have a touch of black on the chest and yellow on the belly. Williamson sapsuckers usually nest in open groves of aspen. Even in winter, they are usually found in the mountains, although they move southward somewhat at that season. Although common in some places, the three-toed woodpecker is not familiar to most birdwatchers because it lives mostly in forests of the far north or in the mountains of the west. It is recognized by the irregular white stripe down the back, the barring on the sides, and the yellow crown spot on males. Three-toads often move into an area after a forest fire to feed on beetle larvae just under the bark of dead trees, systematically chipping the bark away to find these insects. Our smallest woodpecker, the downy, is also one of the best known. It often lives in suburban areas where there are few large trees and comes readily to suet feeders. Widespread throughout North America, the downy woodpecker does not quite reach the Mexican border. The male has a red patch on the nape, while the female is entirely black and white. The monochrome pattern and the broad stripe down the back separate the downy from all other woodpeckers except the larger hairy woodpecker. In pattern, the hairy woodpecker is almost identical to the downy. The outer tail feathers are unmarked white in the hairy woodpecker and crossed by small black bars in the downy. It is easier to recognize the hairy by its large size and especially by its much larger bill. The hairy woodpecker requires slightly larger trees than the downy, so it is less often seen in suburban parks and yards. The hairy is the less common of the two over much of the east, but is more common than the downy in some parts of the west. A dry country replacement for the downy is the ladder-backed woodpecker, common over much of the southwest. Unlike the downy or hairy woodpeckers, it has narrow barring of black and white on the back. The male has a red patch on the back of the head, lacking in females. Often foraging in small mesquite trees, in certain types of cactus, or even in low bushes, the ladderback is able to live in open country that supports no other woodpeckers. Only in California will you find Nuttall's woodpecker. It is quite similar to the ladderbacked, but has more extensive black on the face and neck and wider black bars on the back. The two species are more easily separated by habit and range. Nuttall's avoids deserts and is most common in oak woodlands and riverside trees along the Pacific coast. Another specialty of the far west is the white-headed woodpecker, found only in mountain pine forests. It is all black except for its white head and a white patch in each wing. The male has a small red patch on the nape. The white-headed woodpecker feeds on insects and on pine seeds, often clambering about in the outer twigs to reach the pine cones. Sociable and noisy, the acorn woodpecker is almost always found in groups, in oak trees. A clan may create its own storehouse for acorns by riddling a dead tree with holes, then stuffing an acorn into each for use in winter. Like other woodpeckers, they feed mainly on wood-boring insects much of the year and may be seen hawking insects from an exposed perch. The acorn woodpecker is found only in the west, although it also has local populations as far south as northern South America. Our most uniformly dark woodpecker, unmistakable in color, Lewis's woodpecker wears a combination of gray, pink, and glossy greenish black. In flight it looks dark and crow-like. It is an uncommon and local resident of open groves of trees in the west, where it was first discovered by the Lewis and Clark expedition. Unmistakable, even in flight, the pileated woodpecker is much larger than our other species and is mostly black, with white wing linings and a fiery red crest. Often rather shy, it requires stands of big trees where it digs in deadwood for insect larvae. Rectangular or oblong diggings are signs that the pileated has been at work. Although widespread, the pileated woodpecker is most common in swamplands of the southeast, the same areas that once provided a home for the even larger ivory-billed woodpecker, probably now extinct in the United States.